You're listening to the ABC Music Talk podcast, a show for those interested in the music industry. This episode takes a look at the interaction between brands and the music industry. But first, a reminder to go rotor your videos. Rotor is for artists, managers, labels, or anyone in the music industry who needs to create video content for promotion or monetization. Rotor makes it fast, easy, and inexpensive to do all of that in one place. Head to www.abcmusic.co and click the Rotor logo on the homepage to access a 10% off discount for the service. My guest for this episode is someone who has had a successful career in linking brands to music and vice versa. Welcome to the show, Rebecca Jolly.
Thank you for having me.
No, thank you for coming all the way to the Halley in Shoreditch, which I am also, once again, using to record these podcasts. So I do hope the sound quality is better than it often is. Nice to be in a treated room for sure.
It is. It's nice to be outside with my own house for sure. Also.
Well, yeah. Again, this is one of those interviews being conducted during lockdown. We were just before we hit record on it, we were discussing the pros and cons of it. So you sort of have a bit more time, and then you also don't at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. Lots of time sitting trying to do things and not having much success at the moment. I think I felt I was very efficient at the beginning of this for a while, and now it's just kind of everything's just rolled into the same kind of days over and over. It's
difficult to get that point of separation sometimes, isn't it?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure most people were sitting at home and nodding along to those comments.
Or nodding off.
Well, let's hope not. In fact, I'm very doubtful. Okay, so the bulk of this interview will be discussing an idea that we chatted about when we had a sort of pre-call on this. About the sort of the current state of the pandemic and sort of the impact on music and potentially what role brands could play.
Yep.
But first, as with everyone that comes on the show, they have to tell me about themselves. So this is where we go back to the beginning. I do have a decent percentage of people that are kind of in their early stages of their career. So I like to get them to, I like my guests to tell the story of how did they end up here in Shoreditch with somebody called Alex Branson? I mean, how did we get to that?
The dream.
It's a dream that nobody has, but it is a dream nonetheless in that sense. Good. So where did it all begin? How did you because you've done lots of different things.
I have. I mean, I'd like to say that there'd been some kind of plan that led to all this, but really that hasn't really been the case. I think my career has kind of seen me jumping around between music and brand worlds, and kind of between events and media also. And it's all led up to a point where they all came together in one place. I think, music's something that's just always been my kind of passion in my blood. I went to university in Manchester, and I think that's where I really discovered the music scene. You know, I just became for a while, believe it or not, a massive drum and bass kid, and got so into the music scene, and that's really kind of paved the way, I think, for my eventual career in music. But before then, I studied history at university, and I think I finished university and wasn't quite sure what my options were going to be. Certainly wasn't thinking of a career in music at that point. And I feel like, everyone kind of laid out the options as teacher or librarian.
I was going to say that studying history, like, what do you do with that?
I know.
Become a historian.
It was great for a while because I had very few hours at university, but then I finished and I was like, oh God, what am I going to do now? So decided to be a journalist, and so I did my postgraduate journalism qualification. My first job was actually working, very non-music related, but working for the PGA Tour as a golf reporter, which was actually, I knew nothing about golf, which I think they quite liked because I was kind of brought in to write about the more human side of the golfers, as it were. Travelled the world doing that for a while, and then decided, I was still up north at that point, decided I wanted to move down to London and kind of see what else was going on in the journalism world. Moved down to London and realised the main thing that was going on in the journalism world was that salaries were incredibly low. So I pursued that for a while, and then actually ended up getting a job at a PR agency. And so that kind of started my work with brands, really. And I found it really interesting. I worked with a lot of kind of brands, typically partnering them with different cultural pursuits so they could reach their audience in some way. And, you know, that's where I got a bit of my first understanding of kind of how the brand world was to work and what they needed to achieve from their marketing. And within a few years of doing that, actually, somebody got in touch with me and mentioned the fact that there was a music company in Amsterdam who was looking for someone to run one of their brand partnerships. And I'd kind of been in London for a few years at that point and thought that it could be an interesting change of pace, change of scene to move to Amsterdam. Didn't know the company, so decided to go over to Amsterdam and see what it was all about. And the person who connected me into it told me that they produced these huge events for 50,000 people and everyone dressed in white. And I was like, what? This was during the time as well when the London scene, the music scene, was so incredibly underground. It was all very grungy and punky, and the band scene. I used to promote a couple of nights in London, one at 333 and one at 93 for East, and it was really
good venues. Really
great, so much fun, so like filthy and fun and amazing. And then went to Amsterdam to see what all this was about, and this person was right. There was 50,000 people dressed in white in a stadium in Amsterdam, and it was probably one of the most mind-blowing experiences of my life. Like this huge event for 12 hours, and people danced from start to finish. The most incredible pyrotechnic displays I'd ever seen, light shows. It was incredible. So I was like, okay, let's do this for a couple of years. So came to work for them, and the event was called Sensation. The company was called ID&T. They also produce all kinds of incredible festivals like Mysteryland and Tomorrowland and Q-Dance, which is a hard style thing. So that was my first real immersion into, I guess, the music industry side of things. So I ran all the partnerships for Sensation with Samsung, and then kind of worked in project management across a lot of their other festivals. So really caught the bug as it related to electronic music as well. So previously that hadn't really been my kind of area necessarily. So worked there for a couple of years and really started to understand actually how the point of a brand being involved in something like that, both from the music entity's point of view, but also from the brand point of view. For them to be creating an experience that so many people were so kind of involved in, and so just, I guess, kind of it added value to their experience for the night kind of prior to it, after the event, in content as well, the model that most brand partnerships are these days. So I did that for a couple of years, and then decided I think I missed everything in London and decided to move back to London. And at the time, kind of continuing that brand and music theme, there was an agency that had really caught my eye for a while at the time called Splendid Communications, and they were doing really interesting work with brands in music.
Right.
It was founded by a couple of guys who were real music heads, but wanted to have a kind of a proper job and a proper business, and so set up an agency. And they one of their big clients was Smirnoff, and it was that kind of golden era of brands doing really great things. They did create Smirnoff creative grants where they put money into people with great ideas in nightlife, and it was that kind of moved me back to London, and I started working with them, and again kind of immersed myself in the music and brand world. I think also coming from the music world directly, then back into the brand world, and we actually ended up brokering a partnership between Smirnoff, who was our client, and Sensation. So I actually brought Sensation from Amsterdam to London with Smirnoff as the sponsor, as kind of part of that. And we did it at the O2 Arena, and it was, it was interesting, very, very kind of interesting time. And not after a couple of years there, we took on a new streaming service as a client, little known at that point, called Spotify.
Never heard of it. That'll never work. That's a silly name, isn't it? What does it even mean?
There were probably a few people in meetings who said that at the time.
I remember. Yeah, that absolutely happened.
Absolutely. So we were working with Spotify in London, and then it was at the time when they decided they were going to launch in the US. So I moved to the US 10 years ago now, actually. Wow. In fact, it was around this time 10 years ago that it was fielded in a meeting, and I don't think they'd even finished the sentence before I accepted and volunteered to go to New York. So I moved to New York with the intention of being there for a couple of years to launch Spotify there effectively, or work on the team that was launching Spotify. So I spent my first year in New York having the time of my life, really, but also working on establishing Spotify as a brand in the US. And as part of that, I actually was part of the team. We did the first Spotify activation at South by Southwest. So we did a Spotify house for 10 days. The time is a funny thing. I don't know if you've been South by Southwest, but it felt like we were there for a year in the end. I think time takes on a whole different meaning in Austin, but we did the Spotify house over there. So the premise of which was to really establish Spotify as a brand in that kind of world, and also just kind of bring a load of emerging artists through the Spotify house. And I mean, it was great. We had like Alabama Shakes and so many great bands just kind of playing in the garden at the Spotify house. And it was really interesting. And again, we had brand sponsors involved. So it was just still this kind of convergence of the brand and music worlds.
And what was your role at Spotify at that time?
My kind of a bit of a hybrid role. I was the US lead for the agency that I moved over with for Splendids, and we kind of did a cross section of work for Spotify. We did a lot of their PR stuff, general marketing, production, and kind of producing the activations. We also kind of helped with the brand deals. They did a big deal with Coca-Cola at that time, so we also kind of produced all the marketing and various different elements of content and what have you around that. So general marketing, really. So that was my first year in New York, really, was working on Spotify over there, which was quite a nice introduction to the country. And then I kind of towards the end of that year, ID&T, the company that I'd worked for in Amsterdam, got back in touch and said they told me they'd decided to launch in the US, and would I be interested in running their partnerships division. They were going to be launching Sensation, the infamous White Party, Mysteryland, Tomorrowland, all their different kind of properties across the US. So I decided to do that. It felt like a great kind of jump across back into the music world proper. So started in, I think, the January, and within 2 months they'd announced their acquisition by SFX. And I can see you laughing. So I feel like you know that there's some stories coming.
No, I mean, it never looked crazy at any point.
It was crazy.
Of course
it was really, really crazy. It was, I mean, I went from this kind of Dutch company of like lovely people who I'd known for a long time, who were doing amazing things, who had no motivation other than creating the best possible things they could, and knowing and understanding the culture of the world that they represented more than anyone. And it was to work with people. It was so invigorating to work with people who had that passion for it. And I can remember we were in Miami for Miami Music Week with the announcement of the SFX acquisition, and It was interesting. I can remember thinking this is going to go one way or the other. And, you know, this could either be huge and pivotal and landmark, or it might not be the right thing for them to do. And it was perhaps both, I think, in the end. But, and from there onwards was a really crazy few years, honestly, It was a kind of a roller coaster, but I came out when I came out the other side of it. It took me a couple of months and looked back and realized I'd never learned so much in that time as I did during that time at SFX. Just the kind of immersion into that world and the crazy things that happen. But I mean, so ID&T was SFX. For people who don't know about this, SFX was actually created by Bob Silliman, the late Bob Silliman, who was a very kind of fascinating, enigmatic man who he had started American Idol. He'd started the kind of original Live Nation, and this was his swan song. Essentially, he'd seen what was happening in electronic music and decided to come together with a series of different people, and put together a company to acquire all the best electronic music companies in the world, essentially, and create a behemoth entertainment company, along with Shelley Finkel and Joseph Rashkoff and all those people. So he pulled that together, went on an acquiring mission. There was actually, I think there was a time, a lot of people always talked to me about this, where every single electronic music in the electronic music company in the world always said that they were waiting for the phone call from Shelley Finkel, and it usually came, which always makes me laugh because I had my own phone call from Shelley Finkel at one point, which was actually how I ended up meeting my husband.
Oh, wow. It's a love story.
He made me with my husband. So anyway, so SFX acquired all these companies, of which ID&T was the largest. And so as the person who was heading up partnerships and revenue for ID&T, I ended up being pulled into the kind of, I guess, the steering committee and board of how to kind of decide the direction SFX took, especially from a revenue point of view, right in the early days. So I had a series of very interesting weekend meetings. It was always the weekend, I think it was, which I think was a bit of a power move. They got everyone together, from Duncan Stutterheim from ID&T and Matthew Odell, who was running Beatport at the time, and Disco Donny, and all these people were kind of pulled into a room with Shelley and Joe and Bob heading up the meetings. And there was always around 12 to 14 of us, and they were just the wildest meetings I've ever seen. And I'm sure some of the stories I have from these meetings are probably not suitable for podcasts, but it was a bit of a baptism of fire.
Yeah, but you see, no one listens to this podcast. It's just you telling me. So you go. Feel free to tell us all the.
I mean, there were some eye-opening things. Some are definitely not suitable for podcasts, but there was a moment. I can remember a moment, and the person shall remain nameless. But Bob Sullivan decided, in the middle of a meeting, stopped the meeting and decided he didn't like what the guy was wearing at all. Like, he was like, I won't have anyone wearing these clothes in my meeting. Take all your clothes off now. And the guy obviously protested, and he was like, no, called his PA in and was like, Carol, come, here's $100, go and buy this guy some new clothes. In the meantime, take off your clothes, and basically forced him to stand on the table and take his clothes off and then put them in a wastepaper bin and set fire to them. I mean, this is the kind of and I was a kind of early 30s, like, what? I wasn't quite sure what to make of any of it. But I mean, I feel like that kind of laid the precedent for what happened for the rest of the time at SFX. It was.
Wow.
It was.
Can I just say, maybe focusing on the wrong stuff at that point? a little bit off track.
Well, I mean, but then quite abruptly back to.
Okay. But how bad were these clothes?
Oh, I mean,
was it just
the clothes were fine. The clothes were fine. I think it was just a bit of a Bob party trick, to be honest.
Okay.
But I mean, that was the kind of thing that used to go down all the time. But that's obviously a huge distraction from what we were doing from a work point of view. And we, with this whole acquisition route that SFX went down and all the companies they were acquiring, the objective of all of it was to create a business. And Bob often said, like, this is going to be my 26th company, and it's going to be my most successful one yet, and then I'm done.
Wow.
And so he, the ambition was, and these meetings were, it was really fascinating. The ambition was to make it bigger than ever. And I hadn't sat in a meeting like that before, where the revenue generating strategy was to bring in 5 brands that paid $50 million each to be involved with it, for the privilege of being involved with SFX. And so it was a kind of a real pivotal moment, I think, in understanding, like, that if you kind of had the balls to do it, you could make something, like, there's some of the parts, or make something really, really big if you just put yourself out there and kind of laid a claim to it and gave someone the reason and the confidence to be involved in it. So and that obviously didn't happen in the end.
Right.
We did a lot. We worked across a load of really interesting brand partnerships. We did an incredible deal with Budweiser, with Smirnoff, with T-Mobile, with various different brands, MasterCard. And it was,
how does the pitch go to go? I mean, just come along with this little thing that we're doing. 50 million. Yes. Yes. No. I'm sure that's in the petty cash somewhere. I mean, how does that pitch look? I mean, because that's big, right? That's a big thing for any of those brands.
Oh, it's a huge thing. And we never got there with the $50 million number, but we got a substantial part of the way there. Just the confidence. And also there was a lot to sell. The audience.
Any touch points.
So many touch points and such a huge audience. And I think it was just going out there and kind of putting that to a brand, really. Like, I think the thing that was the main selling point was actually the downfall of the company in the end, because we were selling this incredible, which is something that has always excited me about working in brands and music, which is selling that passion and that the kind of like the raw passion that people feel about music and the energy, and like to offer a brand an opportunity to tap into that, and to tap into that world where people are kind of most connected to everything that happens around them at that time. And I think there's a lot of reasons that things kind of spiraled the way that they did, but one of them I think was the fact that by bringing SFX in and creating a business model that was a really kind of strict business model, stripped away a lot of that. And so with that kind of, you know, by when you have something that's such a strong kind of passionate thing about someone, it's really hard to over structure it and over kind of monetize it. And you know, this is from a world where one of the most amazing guys I've ever kind of worked under is Duncan Stutterheim from ID&T. And this is the guy who every time, like 2 days before any event or festival that they ever did, like Mysteryland, for example, he would walk around the site and do a walk around the site. And every single point around the site, he'd be like, we need more here. We need more decor here. This needs to be better. We need more pyrotechnics. We need this to look kind of bigger and larger than life. We need more fish shooting water in this lake over here. And to the point where he would, you know, any margin.
There's a great film in this, right? I mean, isn't
I
there?
would be so, I would imagine that there's probably something in the works somewhere. Probably have to wait a number of years before things are safe and legal to do. But there's many, many stories. But he used to, so he would do that to the point where any margin that there was on the festival didn't exist anymore by the time the festival doors opened, but he didn't care because he wanted to create the best things ever. And then when you're acquired by a company whose goal is to make money and that's their kind of main objective, that goes, and that's that magic, and it's kind of chipped away at, I think. And so I mean, we had some great success. We did a couple of Mysterylands. We did a couple of Tomorrowlands over in the US as well. One of them was a disaster due to the weather, I believe, in Atlanta. Or I believe it was. And yeah, then
I believe the Fire Festival ran into a weather issue as well, didn't it?
It seems to be a common theme.
It does, doesn't it?
It really does. I was there for 4 years, I think, and went through, there was a whole roller coaster of things going on there, lots of change all the time. And it was around this time which actually kind of opened the doors to what was my most recent job, I guess you could call it. I mean, it was a job. I was watching things unravel at a rate of knots actually at SFX, and kind of trying to understand what the path forward was from that. And I was contacted by the CEO of Mixmag, the British music magazine, and he mentioned the fact that they wanted to launch in America, and would I be interested in running that?
And you're back in the UK at this point?
No. I was still in New York. Yeah, this was about 5 or 6 years ago now. So no, I was still in New York, and so I said no. And then he asked me again, and I said no. And I from having gone from this very kind of large scale events, and you know, as we talked about, this kind of huge ambitions financially, but it took me a while to get my head back into the thought of how to work with a small media company and what the opportunity could be with that, because I didn't have any kind of interest or experience in traditional media advertising or how to generate revenue through traditional media channels. And so I thought, but then I thought about it for a while and actually thought that it seemed like quite a good challenge. So I decided to join them. And I think the fact that I didn't have media experience is what actually kind of created a very different path for Mixmag in the US from how it was positioned in the UK. So we got going over there. There was me and one other guy, Nick DeCosmo, who's the editor, and he kind of headed up creative and editorial, and I headed up the whole business and revenue and all those things that went with it, and approached it similarly to how I'd approached previous brand partnerships in music. And we just started to, rather than kind of selling just the audience or just the media space, we started to go after, you know, put our balls on the table. I think a lesson I'd learned a bit from Bob Silliman, and started to go after the brand briefs and pitches that were going to the likes at the time of Vice and Cornerstone and Fader, and started to win some of them. So we built the business in the US really dramatically, quite quickly. And built the teams in New York and LA. We were running the Mixmag Labs. We had great sponsors for that. But we were doing really interesting integrated campaigns with brands like Smirnoff again, which I feel is a recurring theme in most of the jobs.
Yeah, but with music, Smirnoff is. I mean, it's one of those brands you see.
It is. I feel like it's kind of more or less coming to an end. I think they've gone in a different direction now, but they were really synonymous with music.
It's something that I think we'll get onto a bit later on. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. So we did some great campaigns with those guys. We did where they would sponsor the lab, but we made a load of music documentary series. We did a lot of campaigning as well for gender equality, but also like equality across all underrepresented groups in the music industry. We created some really beautiful. We created a series of retreats in Joshua Tree in LA and in California and in upstate New York, where we brought underrepresented artists through these retreats and produced music with them. We created documentaries for them, and it was really really interesting. We did a lot of,
and rewarding, I guess.
Yeah, really rewarding. It was a really great pivotal time, and I think we actually made a real kind of noticeable shift and change, and that's when it really excites me when a brand gets involved in music. I think it's working with a brand to understand what they need to achieve, but also how they can, and we'll come to this later, I think we've been talking about it a lot, but how they can actually really make a difference in the culture that they're investing in. And when a brand agrees to do that and understands that to do that, they're going to get such a stronger affinity than a brand who, badges something or whatever, then it can really, really work. So, and from there on, we followed, and this is a very long kind of history of my career, but we followed that with a number of other really great, interesting brand deals with the likes of Samsung and Wave, a tech company. And then Mixmag decided we'd had really great financial success in the US, so they decided to acquire Kerrang, the rock and punk publication, and also The Face, the dormant kind of style and culture magazine. So Mixmag then became Wasted Talent as an umbrella company, and we ended up as a kind of independent media company with those 3 titles underneath us, and just running all those and continuing to grow in the US. And we then did a huge global deal with Budweiser, again to create a really interesting global music program that was really kind of shining a light on creativity and cultural creativity specific to different countries around the world. So we were in India and Vietnam and Thailand and, all over the world, just kind of really shining a light on the culture and the music that came from those places. So really, really enjoyable. And so I was there for 5 years. We grew hugely over that time. And then, till around a year ago, which is when I decided to kind of move on from there. So that was my last job, I think, in music.
And you're back in the UK?
And I'm back in the UK. And
when did that happen?
That happened over summer. I mean, it's something, it's always been on the cards. I moved to New York for 2 years, and 10 years later, I finally moved back to the UK. I think the pull of family and things, and it felt like the right time. New York was crazy this year, as the whole world was, but it definitely felt like if there was a time to leave, it was, and to kind of get closer to family, then now was the time.
Well, yeah, and I was talking to our friend in common, Tom, who was still there, and he was sort of mulling over this prospect of Thanksgiving that's coming up, and Christmas, of course. Yeah, it's going to be very different.
It's the constant dilemma. There's a lot of Brits and a lot of Australians and lots of other people in New York, and it's the constant conversation, and then the years creep by. But I mean, I had such an incredible time in New York, and I think the journey from working on the team launching Spotify over there to becoming part of ID&T in this huge entertainment acquisition, and then kind of going into running a media company over there. It was a really interesting journey, and I think working on all different kind of angles and sides of the music and brand world and understanding what could be done with them. It was definitely a decade that I think a lot was achieved, and I think has kind of laid the foundations for whatever comes next. I mean, at the moment, I'm kind of in the process, somewhat accidentally, of setting up my own business where I'm working with various different companies within the music industry, whether it be labels or media companies, and helping them realize their potential. And especially at the moment, after the year that has been 2020 pivot slightly in some cases to be able to or kind of broaden what they do from a product standpoint to be able to generate more revenue and kind of scale and grow their businesses. So all that's come on the back of that decade in New York and the work experience there, I think.
Yeah, there's lots of serendipity in all of that. And we'll come back to that in just a second.
Mm-hmm.
I did just have a question as you were talking earlier about your first sort of that moment of walking into the first white party and just going, what on earth is going on here? Because it triggered a memory on, I was in Amsterdam at ADE, the big dance music conference there, and there was a presentation by Beatport, but it had some of the SFX execs in and around. You may have been one of them. I don't remember, but
I think I was definitely there. I mean, Beatport's interesting. Beatport was the music platform that underpinned all SFX's event and live acquisitions. And Beatport's actually one of the clients I'm working with again at the moment. I feel everything comes full circle in some way.
It does well. And I just finished a stint there as well, helping out the new CEO, Rob, my boy. So, but the question I had was, it was something. Partly came from my memory of the Romano conversation that I had, who'd been the MD of NME, so this sort of magazine thing there. But it was more about sort of back in those days, and I think you've sort of answered this about your description of the ID&T exec who would just be like, let's just do this and let's do the other. I mean, have you seen sort of that change as SFX sort of came into it? Because Beatport told this story, and they spun a great story at that conference, sort of thing that they did at ADE, which was, we are going to essentially use data to understand the audience better, and there was that sort of immediate link between people going to an event and listening to certain music and then the impact that might then have on music they might purchase through Beatport. And this was the story it was a room full of record companies. It was people that were supplying music into Beatport. I mean, how close did it ever sort of get to that? I mean, did they ever really sort of make that link between the live and the kind of the digital side of things in terms of audience?
I don't know. That's a tough question, actually, because I think I feel like everybody's kind of lent into the data a little bit and understands more about their audience's spending habits and the other areas that they're interested in, which I think makes for an easier brand sell. But
because there were things around, like, I think, if memory serves correct, RFID tags were going to be used to track people as they moved around the different stages and rooms and things like that. And it was, and again, my memory of it was sitting there going, that actually sounds really it sounds like genius, right? Yeah. And actually, if you are SFX and you do own all of these different parts of the business, you can actually do that.
It was definitely the plan for a while. And I think there were all kind of plans relating to it as well. And I remember there was actually a conversation about creating, based on that and on that data, an AI club that was almost like a kind of living, breathing club, and that tapped into everything from people's mood to whatever they were doing around the venue at the time and responded to it accordingly. And that progressed quite far and then didn't get off the ground in the end. But I think that it's always the plan, because I think that the main driving force for that kind of activity is always to monetize further the audience. And I think that there's a limit to how far you can commoditize the audience. And I think it's for me, a brand partnership or working with brands and getting brands to be able to invest money into music and the audience who enjoy music works better when it's simpler, and when a brand is simply adding some great value that doesn't overcomplicate things, but is a beautiful surprise or is doing something great and putting back into the scene in some way. And I think that there's a kind of hesitancy, I think, among the audience for these things that overcomplicates their experience and but doesn't have an immediate payoff, And so I think, I mean, I don't know what your experience has been with it and over here in the UK. I mean, I've literally, since I came back to the UK, I've not set foot in a music venue, very sadly. So I don't know how things have changed over here, but that really dropped off, I think, in the US. It was such a huge push for a while, 5-6 years ago, and everyone was trying to connect everyone digitally to everything and swipe everything as you went past. And I just don't think people wanted it that much. So I think there's a limit to how much you can commoditize the audience for that purpose. And so I think that we look at Beatport is great, actually, in terms of the data that they can pull in from their audience because of their spending habits, and it's just very easy to kind of track where they are living online. But I think to take it further than that and to try and too hard and connect digital and live, it's not always that smooth. And no, for
sure.
That's kind of been my experience with it.
So you've already mentioned 2020 has been a hell of a year.
Yes.
For the globe though, which is useful, I think, in some respects, in the
reassuring
sense
that you're not the only one.
I think, it's sort of put everyone it's like a level playing field in some respects.
Yeah.
And so your the work that you've been doing with brands and the experience, how have you seen, we talked about this a bit before, there's been some changes, the change with the way with which they position themselves, the sorts of things that they might attach themselves to. I'm going to go with travel as a big one. A lot of lifestyle brands will attach themselves to that sort of very beautiful world of, clean beaches and, faraway places and that sort of aspirational kind of like concept. I mean, how have you seen them deal with that? How have they changed? What do they try to do? Not necessarily just about travel, by the way, just, in general.
I mean, it's definitely been a funny year. And I think you talk about travel, also music, that's the main reason we're here and talking about this is they're both sectors that just have by and large ceased to exist. Certainly the live music and the element where brands can really, really engage with their audience. They've obviously, kind of hit a huge stumbling block this year, but I think kind of partly as a result of that, but also partly just because everybody's been hedging their bets and not sure what direction the world was going to go in next. I think brands have pulled back from all of this kind of activity this year. I mean, I think it's very few brands who have continued to do what we, I guess, would call cultural marketing and actually trying to kind of reach consumers through their passion points this year. I think there's been a lot of either pivoting and kind of trying to get behind something related to the pandemic or something that can help, or other brands have just focused on key business and kind of battening down the hatches and securing things by focusing on their essential business and essential business marketing and kind of making sure their sales are still going through, or that. So everything, as well as the music industry taking a hit with everything that's happened about it. I'm sure you've talked about it with so many guests previously over the last few months, the hit for the live industry, how that's impacted artists. There's also been this impact of brands pulling back their spend in this industry as well. But I do think, we're speaking in late November, and there's been a real change in the last month or so, I would say, where brands are starting to sit up and look about and figure out how they can position themselves in 2021.
So do you think that the brands are now just looking at this being the version of new normal? So where once before they had all these sort of multiple touch points and things that they could do, music venues being a high point of visibility, perhaps even ambassador campaigns. Do you think they're having to sort of adjust for what they think is going to be essentially the new normal?
I think so. And I think some did it quickly. Some, some kind of pivoted within a month or two and started kind of putting their weight and their money behind things like live streaming, of which there was so much in those early stages of the pandemic. But a lot haven't. I think there was understandably a huge wave in 2020 of brands just pulling back from doing anything. And I think I feel month on month, people were still kind of waiting to see what would shake out. And there was, everyone was starting to kind of think about finding their feet again a few months into the pandemic when everything hit as it relates to the race issues and Black Lives Matter. And that really came to the fore. And there was a huge phase from all the brands I work with and speak with about being really anxious or nervous about putting a foot wrong or being perceived to be tone deaf or something that they did landing incorrectly. And it was, I think that combined with obviously everyone needing to focus from a brand point of view, needing to focus on their key core business and kind of make sure that their business and their sales were in a secure position, saw them all really pulling back from cultural marketing across the board. So obviously music, where there was less opportunity to market anyway, but all of the sectors and everyone, the brand activity really took a hit. And now, as we talk in kind of late November, I feel like there's definitely, the brands are starting to kind of pull their head above the parapet and start to figure out how they can show up next year and what they're going to do. I personally, I'm working with some brands who are doing really, really great things and who are addressing what has happened this year, the way that people are feeling, the fact that there is such a need for connectivity. And some of the brands I'm working with are really starting to try and understand that and see how they can facilitate a path forward in, as we call it, the new normal, or however that may be. But also disappointing, for personally, a disappointing lack of brands really kind of showing up and stepping up to the plate as it relates to, I guess, the sectors and the areas that they've relied on so heavily for cultural marketing and audience connection previously.
And this is the thing that you said when we spoke that really kind of caught my attention, because you know, obviously funding and support for those that have literally had their entire careers, businesses just decimated by the fact they cannot do what they had been doing for however many years they were doing it before. And of course, you know, funding into the music industry, it can come from various sort of points. You know, maybe you're a recording artist, therefore you can get an advance from your record company. You're a songwriter, get it from your publisher. That gives you cash flow to exist in the world and be who you are. Or it's VC money, perhaps, you know, where you sell a part of your catalog or whatever. But brands have also always been, you know, whether it's through synchronization for an advert or something like that, or whether it is just brand ambassadors and artists become those. And the thing that you said was they have relied upon attaching themselves to this part of culture for so long, and have had so much from that in terms of their positioning for their product, often a product within the world. They actually have a duty of care.
And this is what we spoke about last time we spoke, actually, and it's become something that over the past few months I've spent the last 16, 17 years and fundamentally the last decade working with brands who use this industry and every single part of it, like you say, from the sync deals, to the artists, to the live events, to the platforms to access this audience and to convert sales for whatever it is they're selling ultimately. You know, that's the end goal for all of it. They've capitalized on this industry to such a huge degree, and in some cases contributed to it really effectively, of course. But they've chosen to align themselves with this culture, and this seems to be it's become a kind of almost fanatical obsession of mine really over the last couple of months, is this realization that a lot of the brands who have attached themselves so strongly to it are really noticeably invisible at the moment. They're not kind of stepping up to the plate. They're still sitting back and waiting to see what happens and waiting to see when it might be safe to reemerge and to realign themselves with this and you know, reattach themselves to it. And it's that I've become really kind of incentivized, I think, to try and hurry this process up, because these brands have used this industry for such a long time, and if they don't step up now, the government isn't stepping up in any way. There's not that many other ways to safeguard the future of the music industry anymore. And if the brands don't, the culture that they relied on so heavily for so long to be able to do their marketing and to be able to reach their audience isn't going to exist in the same way. And, you know, they can't just wait for, I feel very strongly that they can't just wait for other people who are really struggling here to try and rebuild themselves and get themselves to a success level again, where a brand then deems it safe, I suppose, to realign themselves with it. And I think that there has to be this movement of brands stepping up and kind of rescuing or safeguarding the industry to a degree. And my perspective, I am working with all the music companies I'm working with at the moment in slightly different ways. I'm kind of working with them to create a proposition, whether it's through the record label I'm working with, Astroworks, support is to kind of support this new generation of artists that are coming through that aren't able to break through at a time like this when there's no live and no kind of marketing that goes around live, or whether it's with a Beatport, for example, or whether it's with a music magazine. I'm kind of working with them to create programs that incentivize and try and bring brands in to contribute back into rebuilding this culture. And it's kind of part by design, part by default, as is the way with most things that I do in my career. It becomes the thing that is being my goal, really, is to get these brands who, and there's a good handful of them who have relied so heavily on electronic music especially, who I feel, really need to step up to the plate and to kind of give back and rebuild this culture. And my perspective from a for a brand's point of view is that it can only go well for them, you know, if whatever steps they take to put back into this culture, which is really, really struggling, they're going to emerge as a savior, essentially. Absolutely. And so it feels like a bit of a no-brainer to me, but there still seems to be a quite a degree of caution or just, I don't want to say laziness necessarily, but just there's definitely an element of people wanting to kind of attach themselves to things when they're riding high, but not being there enough, I don't think, when things are struggling.
Yeah, well, and so it's, I guess, great to be part of a company like Beatport, who has infrastructure that can actually offer them immediate touch points with a segmentation of the audience. And so have you been finding that some of has it kind of switched around, like in terms of the brands coming in perhaps once upon a time saying, we want to do this? Is it switching around to you sort of going, well, actually, have you guys thought about doing this? Or was it always that way around?
No, it always has been case by case. I think some brands have come with their checkbooks and wanted to be told how to connect with the music industry, and other brands have got a really strong idea of what they want to do. I think at the moment, I've seen the last couple of months, brands are definitely kind of venturing forth and trying to understand what they can do, but with dramatically reduced budgets against what they used to have previously. But you know, there are a few who are coming forward and wanting to do something that addresses the state of 2020. But I don't think I think we still have a long way to go before we can get brands to really contribute effectively in a way that's going to make a big difference.
Yeah, and do these brands have kind of presumably they have sort of policy divisions and kind of parts within their organization that is looking at actually what are we saying here, and sort of, you know, just checking that press release before it goes out, or that video sort of thing that they did, and to make it sort of not be. I think so,
and I think that they've definitely pulled back, I think, from too much of their putting forward too much of their own messaging, and I think actually that's where it's really beneficial for them to partner with authentic, kind of trusted companies within the music industry who've been around for a long time. It's kind of a safer option. I think if they can lean on a music company who knows, whether it's a label or whatever it is, who knows how to rebuild and how to connect with their audience and how to communicate with them, and relies on them to build a program that they can facilitate, then I think it's a lot safer way for them to get involved in this than trying to create something themselves that, I mean, they're quite right to be cautious of the fact things can land incorrectly, as they often do with brands.
So it sounds like a good piece of advice to a brand at the moment is to just pay attention to the parts of the industry that you can attach yourselves to and listen to what actually is important to the audience, and just be part of that conversation, be available, be present.
I think so. And proactive. I think they need to, it's a bit of a call to arms really for brands who have relied really heavily on, well, it might not be music, it could be art, it could be anything. All these sectors are really struggling, and look at how they've benefited from it, or what they've done and how they've worked with them over the last few years, and kind of figure out how take proactive steps to contributing to the regrowth of the industry, I suppose.
Yeah. So the sorts of things that they can offer is obviously, you know, some money, right? That's always helpful. But I guess also like their ad inventory, and that could be, you know, on sort of terrestrial TV, or that could be within Spotify and the ad funded sort of part of that. So are some of those ideas just to kind of perhaps focus less on their core product and actually try and pull through some of the artists' music, or their whatever they're up to?
Yeah, I mean, I think they can use all their tools in their arsenal really and apply them in some way. I mean, and all the ones that they used to use, you know, they used to put their media spend against this kind of area and apply it now. You know, don't wait for things to pick up again, but apply it now to be able to help the industry repair itself. You know, we talk a lot about the artist needing help, kind of having a leg up as well, but a huge part for brands is the venues, is live venues. You know, this is how, especially when you work so much with fashion brands or drinks brands, and it's that kind of live experience that is really important to them. And I think there's a lot of work to be done around that, around kind of securing the venues, because they're going to need them. All these brands are going to need them in the future. They need people to be drinking beer in these venues whilst they listen to music. And, you know, they're not going to be there if they're not proactive about putting their support into it a bit. And there's so many exciting programs that you can create with that a brand can facilitate. And obviously financially is a huge part of it, but that a brand can facilitate to be able to rebuild these different areas of the struggling industry.
I mean, they could actually use the venues as perhaps places where they film things, right? I mean,
totally.
Yeah. Why not? Get it involved. Have you seen any of them, you know, like in the music industry, I think all the major record companies came out and said that they were going to put, I don't know, 1 million, 100 million, 10 million, whatever the number was that they gave to and set up a task force. And they had these this sort of like rhetoric that was coming around. One of the companies that I'm sporting, the Jumper from Empire, you know, we did a Voices for Change compilation album, and, you know, and all the money's going through to helping what was going on, especially around Black Lives Matter in particular, you know, something very close to the culture of that company. Have you seen brands do something similar? Have they sort of earmarked, you know, both human resource as much as cash to do it in a sort of formal way, or is that still lacking? Is that something you would advise them to do?
Not enough. There's kind of murmurings of things, and there's a few people, like I say, who've stepped up and they're doing small programs that are about kind of moving forward from the year that has been 2020 and how to kind of celebrate the new world as it is moving forward. But no, not enough. I think it's largely been down to the music industry to save itself. And it's kind of crazy. Beatport's a really interesting example. So because they've been doing, I think, you know, of the Reconnect series that Beatport have been doing, and they started. Well,
it was the thing that both you and I, we now have a Twitch account because of that.
We'd shift the age demographic of Twitch up a few notches. Yeah. I know. I never thought I would have one, but I do now. Well. So Beatport is obviously the kind of online music store, and they created the Reconnect series to be able to raise money. Started in March and April to raise money for those industries, or those sectors within the music industry struggling because of COVID. So they did a couple of like weekend long 36-hour streams, 36 artists, and raised loads of money for different sectors within the music industry. Then they moved on to do something similar for Beirut, which, I mean, God, this really has been a year, hasn't it? If one must forget that. They did a Reconnect series supporting Beirut and raising money for the music and art industry in Lebanon. They then moved into raising money for mental health charities and those who've been really, really affected this year from a mental health perspective. And it's, you know, the music industry is struggling, and the music industry is stepping up to help everyone else, to help themselves, to help everyone else. And it's, you know, it's so amazing that they've done this program. And there's rarely a person I speak to in the music industry or otherwise who doesn't know of the great work Beatport has done through Reconnect. And it seems to me that, you know, I think it's always the way though, whatever happens in life, it's like the people who need help are the ones who help others more. Yeah. And, you know, I'm not kind of suggesting that there haven't been brands who've really taken a hit this year. Of course they have, but it's all relative. And I think that there's, you said it really well when we first started talking, but they kind of have this duty of care. And I think that, you know, they are the ones who need to come forward a bit now, I think. But, you know, time will tell. And I've had some really interesting conversations with people who've been receptive to figuring out how they can, play a bigger role in 2021, but there's definitely still also a just getting through the last few weeks of the year.
Yeah, for sure.
Which I can empathise with.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And look, I think, you know, we can be, you know, hard on anyone we like, but I think we've seen across every industry, every part of the world is that that period of adjustment is difficult. You know, that whole. I mean, I know it from a sort of very micro level. I have a very small bar with a couple of my friends, and you know, the constant changes in what the government, you know, imposed upon us in terms of when we can open, how we can open, who we can have in, how they're going to sit, what they've got to do when they're in there.
Yeah.
Just keeps, and it changes every week. It feels like. I mean, it doesn't, but you know what I mean. It does feel like that. And so I guess for, you know, a lot of these brands that have, you know, for so long, as you said, like for so long, just being like, well, this is how we go to market.
Yeah.
This is how we launch that new product, or how we boost sales during a particular period of the time, you know, of the year, you know, and they're all probably a bit caught off guard, I would imagine.
Totally. And also if we're being really honest about these things and kind of understanding where brands are coming from. And, you know, much of my frustration over the past how many years of working with them has been that the brands who have got the money to be able to invest effectively into something like this are also the brands where there is a huge amount of red tape. And it's like, the analogy I always use is it's like trying to turn a tanker, you know, and they're just not so nimble and able to just drop everything. Some brands do it really, really well. You know, we've seen that brands have stepped up a lot this year in some ways.
Are there any that you are okay calling out, that you admire, that you think have done a decent job here, as small or as big as it may be?
I think there were a lot of brands who stepped up. I was still in New York during the heart of the kind of aftermath of the George Floyd killing, and I think I saw there were a lot of brands, and you know they already had a foot in it, but brands like Ben and Jerry's who really kind of made a bit of a drive forwards. And
are there any programs or projects that you were involved with that you saw brands really sort of support and double down on?
I'm actually working on a project at the moment with Absolute Vodka, actually, and it's not necessarily kind of proactively repairing the music industry, as it were, but they're definitely addressing the audience who've really suffered from that lack of connection this year. And we're creating a big New Year's Eve program, which is about kind of dancing together as one and kind of waving goodbye to 2020 and kind of trying to create as much human connection and authentic human connection as possible when we're all in our own houses. So, you know, they're taking steps to kind of try and capture some kind of experience that uplifts people and sets the next year off in a better way. Yeah, I'm also working with a brand in the US, a beer brand, not one of the big ones, but a smaller beer brand who are they've kind of moved their headquarters to a place in Texas, and they're looking to really give back to the music industry there. And rather than kind of land as a brand and kind of take over the city, they're I'm working with them to pull together all kind of small local, whether it's record shops, whether it's small music venues, and really kind of support and align with those guys and uplift them in the city. So there's definitely some brands starting to do some nice things, and I'm just really hopeful that some of these programs that we're putting together can really trigger some of the brands into action and actually kind of get something off the ground that hopefully then propels others to jump on board and realize it's that missing piece, I think, where there's that in understanding that if they don't act now in the next few years, the culture that they've relied on so heavily just won't be there anymore. So.
Yeah, so it's almost self-preservation for themselves as much as anything else.
Yeah.
Any closing thoughts?
My mind's very focused and full of news of the vaccine, and just hoping that I'm just really hoping that all these, you know, I just think back to talking through my career with you now, so much it has been, so much of the stories I have, or so much of my experience through my whole career has been based around live and being with people and communities, and you know, whether it be at a festival or a tiny music venue somewhere, or just like with people creating great things. And I think that this year, as you say, has been a huge leveler, and I'm just really hopeful and excited about what's going to come out of the back of it, and the fact that the people, you know, everyone's going to put all their energy into creating some great experiences and getting things going again next year. Yeah, no, I agree. I think certainly the appreciation of human connection has you know, it's something now that people are much more aware of. Yeah, it's people and the power of it. Yeah, and I think why this second wave has been really challenging for people, because it's just people really, really need it more than ever. This has been going on for a long time now, and I think the people that I look forward to seeing how people bring it back in a really positive way next year. Yes, yeah. Well, and presumably a lot of any of the brand output will be about positivity and trying to inject that
into the thoughts and minds of everybody out there. Very good. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Fascinating. Really, really helpful. Really enjoyable chat.
Yes, lovely. Thank you so much for having me. See you on a dance floor soon, hopefully.
Well, absolutely. That's a great way to end, isn't it? Just that idea. Yeah, good. Okay, so to my listeners, thank you for listening. I welcome all feedback, comments, and suggestions for future shows. My Twitter and Instagram handles are @AlexBranson. And you head to the website www.abc.co and you'll find a contacts page there. If you want to get in touch with the show. And once again, thank you to the incredible Audio Assassins for the music branding to the show. Music in the show notes.